Rainwater harvesting, household water management, and intensive vegetable production are three vital factors contributing towards ensuring food security for rural South African households. A family is food secure when all the members of the household have access to enough, safe, and nutritious food to meet their needs and preferences. 1/3 of all South Africans are vulnerable to hunger. This equals to about 14 million people. Children especially are victims of food insecurity and suffer devastating long-term impacts of malnutrition. Key factors contributing to hunger in South Africa include high levels of rural poverty and unemployment, the soaring price of food, and the fact that many communities are no longer growing their food as they did in the past. South Africa is a hot, dry, and water-stressed country. Our average rainfall is less than 500 millimeters per year, and only 9% of this rainwater reaches the rivers and dams that supply our water. The remaining 91% of the rainwater falls on our land, and we can learn how to harvest and manage this water so that we can grow food for our families. The advent of climate change, with predictions of longer drought periods and increased storms and flooding, makes it even more imperative that households in rural areas develop strategies to cope with a variable climate, to make the most use of whatever water falls on their land and to grow their own food. We traveled all around South Africa, visiting communities where we met people that have successfully implemented the rainwater harvesting and household food gardening approach pioneered by Matsepo Kumbane.
I've never watered once. It all survived, grew from the runoff water.
And we filmed the training courses given by Erna Kruger and Tabani Nicholas Madondo, where young community facilitators were learning the methods to share with their own communities. Now, we will explore rainwater harvesting in detail and look at principles and techniques of collecting and storing the water that falls in and around our homestead. Rainwater harvesting is the process of collecting, transporting, and then storing rainwater for later use. This often involves collecting rainwater from a catchment area and channeling it to our food garden or agricultural field, or alternatively to a tank where it can be stored for later use. There are many different ways of harvesting rainwater. The cleanest rainwater comes from the roof and can be stored in tanks or drums for cooking and drinking. However, water from the roof is a very small portion of the water that falls on the yard and the water that runs through or past the yard from the surrounding areas. This is called surface runoff and is not clean enough to drink, but can be used for a variety of productive uses such as food gardening, water for animals and poultry, and brick making. Water conservation is the protection and efficient management of the water that we do have in productive ways. Examples are increasing the infiltration of water into the soil by increasing ground cover or mulching and recycling and reusing water, known as grey water harvesting. There are 5 key steps that help you to make the best use of rainwater at your homestead. These are intercepting or capturing rainwater, slowing the water down and spreading it out, channeling the water to where it is needed, storing the water for use, and setting up grey water harvesting. Throughout, we try to get as much water as possible to infiltrate into the soil so that the amount of water lost to evaporation or runoff is minimized. Step 1. Intercepting or capturing of rainwater. All water flows downhill, and when planning to capture rainwater in and around a homestead, the first step is to look at the layout of your homestead and where water flows naturally during rainstorms. Also observe where water is flowing close to your homestead, like off-roads or fields close by, that you can direct to your homestead. It is a good idea to draw a map of your area. Draw in where the water flows and give an indication of how much water flows there. You will then know where to intercept or direct the water.
The house here, and then this is catching the roof water. But there's still a lot of runoff, but it gets directed into the basins also as runoff.
In Chikonelo, in the northeast corner of South Africa, we visited Mrs. Leah Matidze, who showed us that she lives at the bottom of a little hill. When they first planned where to put their rainwater tank, they looked at where the water flows naturally down the hill. Then they channeled the rainwater into their tank, and her tank is almost always full, even in the dry season. She says that she has enough rainwater for growing her maize and vegetables, and she grows enough to sell and to use that money to send her children to school. Always start as close to the top of your local catchment as you can. A catchment refers to an area where all the water drains into the same area. Water in different catchments drain to different places. These catchments can be quite small, such as the swept area in front of your house, or very large, such as the mountain range that feeds the streams and the rivers. Step 2. Slow the water down and spread it out. The way water flows downhill depends on the shape of the land. If the land is very steep, the water will flow fast during rainstorms and will take soil and organic matter with it, causing erosion. If the slope is flat or gentle, then the water flows more slowly and causes little or no erosion. You can tell if the land is being eroded when you see dongas and when the streams flowing into the rivers and the rivers themselves are brown and muddy. Even soil under a tap can erode away if it is not protected. For example, by putting down rocks. Good topsoil is very precious as it has all the nutrients needed to grow good food. It cannot be replaced once it has been washed away. We can stop the run of water from gathering speed or force by reducing the steepness of the slope, by shortening the distance the water runs downhill before it gets slowed down and spread out, and by increasing the ability of the soil to absorb water. There are a number of ways of slowing the water down. We can make small barriers across the slope on the contour lines, such as lines of stones. We can dig a ditch on the contour line, or we can build terraces across the hillside. Contours are imaginary lines that are at the same level across the slope or a hill. When you walk across a slope without stepping up or down, as if it is flat, then you are walking along a contour. When you build barriers or ditches, start at the top of your catchment, which is the top of your homestead, your garden, or your field. When we dig a ditch to slow the water down, it is important to make sure that our ditch is level because the water sinks into the ground rather than flowing downhill. It is difficult to see what is level with your eyes, as often the landscape can be misleading and what we think is level is actually downhill. Even when working in small areas like outside the garden, It is better to measure the level because the lines of fences and houses can be straight, but not necessarily level. There are two types of homemade equipment that we can build to measure contours. These are called the line level and the A-frame. A line level makes use of a spirit level which builders use to make sure that their buildings are level. Inside the spirit level, there is a little window with liquid and an air bubble. When the air bubble is in the middle of the liquid, it means that the line level is level. To make a line level, you will need 5 to 20 meters of line or string, a spirit line level, 2 wooden poles about 2 meters long, and a measuring tape. If the area where you are marking your contour is small, then you only need to use 5 meters of string. For larger areas, you will need to use up to 10 to 20 meters of string. When you hold your arm out to your side and then measure the string from the tip of your hand to your opposite shoulder, it is roughly 1 meter. Measure 5 meters, cut the string, and then tie the string to each pole. An easy way of ensuring that the knots are tied at the same height as the 2 poles is to stand the poles next to each other on a level floor and then make sure that the knots are at the same level. Otherwise, you can measure with a tape measure and mark 10 centimeter intervals from the bottom of the poles and then ensure the knots are tied at the same height on each pole. Hang the spirit level on the line in the middle between the poles. To use the line level, 3 people are needed. One person will place their pole upright at a point from the ground which is marked with a small stone. The other person walks across the slope until the line is tight, and a third person hangs the spirit level in the middle of the string and keeps an eye on the air bubble. The second person then moves slowly up and down the hill until the air bubble is in the middle of the window. That shows that you are level and on the contour. This second point is then also marked with a stone or a stick before the line level is moved along to measure the next section. The second method is an A-frame. To make an A-frame, you need the following materials: 2 wooden poles about 2 meters each, 1 wooden pole about 1.2 meters, wire or strong cord to connect the poles or a hammer and nails, string about 1 meter, and a weight to attach to the string such as a stone. You start by connecting the 2 meter long poles together at one end using the strong cord or nails. Then you attach the shorter pole securely across the middle of the longer poles to form a figure A. This is the crossbar. Tie one end of the string to the top of the A where the 2 long poles are joined. Tie the weight to the other end of the string so that it hangs about 15 centimeters below the crossbar, but not touching the ground. To set the A-frame, put the A-frame on solid, reasonably flat ground. Mark the positions of the legs on the ground. Let the weight settle to a natural position and make a temporary mark with a pen or a pencil where the string passes the crossbar. Note the string must be close to the crossbar, but the weight must hang freely. Then rotate the A-frame so that the position of the legs is now reversed, but on the same spots as before. Once again, let the weight settle to a natural position and make a temporary mark. Exactly halfway between these 2 temporary marks is the level position of the A-frame. Make a permanent mark on the crossbar to indicate this position. To use an A-frame, you start by placing the A-frame along the slope where you want to make the contour. Mark the positions of the legs using small stones or pegs. Now take a step along the contour, leaving one leg on the ground and pivoting the A-frame around so that the next leg is further along the slope. Do not pick it up off the ground. Now move the leg still floating up or down the slope until the string crosses your level line. Now place it on the ground and mark the spot. Continue to walk and pivot the A-frame along the slope. Step 3. Channel the water to where it is needed. Now that you have worked out where the water flows in and around your yard and how to slow it down, you need to channel the water to where you need it to go. You can channel the water directly to your garden beds, to a contour barrier or ditch, or you can direct the water to where you want to store it for later use.
You must make sure the water must come like this, going like this, going here, like this.
Matsepo Kumbane, a social and rainwater harvesting activist who has worked with poor people all her life, has designed her own water harvesting and conservation system, which we call Run-On. In this system, she catches water running down a slope using a contour ditch or farrow. She then directs this water into her garden using a series of sunken but level paths and steps. This water slowly moves along these paths and seeps into the sides of the raised trench beds which make up her garden.
This gets full and overflow over here. And then all this place here is covered, all the footpaths are covered in water. Yeah, this big furrow, this one is one of the biggest harvesters because it collects all the water from the road. You know, where you came, that the road, and then there it's low lying, and then it gushes and then it channels that water, and then it ramificates into here, and then into here. When it gets here, all this is water. Even the water from the road and all is channeled, cannot go through over this side. It's channeled and goes through on this path, and then it gets flooded here, and then it moves into this deep furrow here. It overflows, it floods this area, and it overflows.
Her beds are designed as small basins that also catch and hold water. At the bottom of the garden, she has an outlet or overflow for any excess water to move to, and this directs water to her underground storage tank. In this way, she can use almost all the rainwater that falls in her yard.
The lava water through here, through this, and then travels here, holding them. It's full now. Right now, when we're standing here, it's full. And then this is the earth dam. It will be paved and closed. So now, if I develop this tube, I will have now caught every drop. Nothing that will pass. It's only rain that will be, because even I'm catching that from the upper side, from the gate up there, all that flow gets through here. It doesn't go branch anywhere else. It goes from here. So I've maximized, kept it from a wider overflow from the up slope and channeled it to where I need it to come. So I'm harvesting those millions and millions of liters, of cubic liters, into the underground.
To summarize, the main techniques that Matsepo uses in her garden are the contour ditch, which she uses to collect the water that flows from her neighbor's land. She also uses the contour ditch at the bottom of her plot to collect any remaining runoff. The contour basin, where she does her planting and which keeps the water in the basin. And the diversion farrow or ditch, which moves the water to where she wants it to go. The diversion farrow or ditch is a very simple way of moving water. We spent some time in Bushbuck Ridge where students are learning how to dig the diversion ditch and the contour ditch. First, you need to mark out a route for your diversion ditch so that it will intercept as much water as possible and carry it to where you will use it.
The channel that comes here. So people have already taken advantage of the channel with this ditch here. But what I would suggest we do is we start here Because then some of the water that's coming here can now go that way, and then some can go that way.
Yeah.
You should not make this diversion furrow directly down the slope, as this will concentrate and speed up the water too much and cause erosion. Now dig a ditch approximately 30 centimeters wide and 30 centimeters deep. You can place the soil from the ditch on the downslope side of the ditch, forming a soil ridge. This is also known as a soil berm or soil bund. In this diagram, you can see the ditch or furrow at the top of the garden and then the water flowing through the raised beds. Step 4. Storing the water. There are two main ways of storing water. Firstly, you can store water directly in the soil. The second method is to store water in containers such as tanks. We will look at both methods in more detail. Storing water in the soil. There are a number of different techniques that you can use to store water in the soil. Here we are going to briefly look at swales, stone bunds or mounds, terraces, tide ridges, and fertility pits. All these techniques seek to do what we have discussed already: intercept runoff, slow it down, and help it to infiltrate the soil. Swales. A swale is an earth ridge made along a contour with the ditch on the upslope side. To make a swale, you first need to mark out your contours starting at the top of your slope. Then dig a ditch along the contour about 30 to 40 centimeters deep and 50 centimeters wide. The soil is placed downslope of the ditch and used to create a ridge that is level on the top. Walk along the ridge and stamp on the soil to compact it slightly. Typically, permanent crops such as fruit trees are planted just below the ridge of a swale, while seasonal crops are planted in between swales. Swales are a good idea at the top of a garden or field, and if the garden is on a slope, you can place swales at regular intervals inside the garden. Stone bunds and terraces. A stone bund is a wall or heap of stones placed along the contour lines to slow down, filter, and spread out runoff water, thus increasing infiltration and reducing soil erosion. Over time, sediments are captured on the higher side of the bund, and this accumulates to form natural terraces. This takes time to develop. Terraces, on the other hand, are constructed quickly. Terraces look like steps along the contours of a hillside with a flat planting areas in between the steps where planting beds can be developed. Terraces are effective ways of stabilizing a hill slope that would otherwise be too steep for crop production, and it prevents erosion by preventing runoff from cascading down the hill and instead helps it to sink into the soil along the steps. We saw a good example of the effectiveness of terraces when we visited Mr. Sonwabile Dumisa from Gogela in the Mzimvubu Valley in southern KwaZulu-Natal. His homestead is situated on a very rocky hill, which he developed into terraces and planting beds. He gets an abundance of vegetables from his terraces. Terraces can be supported by an earth bank or a stone wall or even rows of old tires. To make terraces, you usually start at the bottom of the slope and work upwards. The first step is to mark out the contour lines for each of the terraces you plan to build. If the hill is very steep, then the terraces will be only 2 meters apart. And if the hill has a gentle slope, then the terraces can be more than 8 meters apart. The next step is to dig a ditch along the contour line. The ditch should be about 40 centimeters deep and 60 centimeters wide. Place the soil upslope of the ditch. Start building the terrace wall by placing large stones along the base of the ditch. Place the biggest stones on the downslope side of the ditch and the smaller stones on the upslope side. Pack the stones so that they lean against the soil to ensure that the wall remains stable. Fill the gaps between the larger stones with small stones. Make the wall between 60 centimeters and 1 meter in height. You then repeat this process and build ditches and terrace walls along each of the marked contour lines up the slope. Finally, level the soil between each terrace and make flat planting beds. To avoid erosion at the ends of the terraces, each terrace must overflow sideways into a drain or into the next terrace. The drain needs to be protected with rocks, branches, or grass. Tide ridges. Tide ridges is a method that increases the water available to plants by collecting rainfall from an unplanted sloping basin and catching it with a furrow and a ridge. Planting takes place on either side of the furrow where the water has infiltrated. The basins are created by digging out shallow furrows about 30 centimeters deep and 50 centimeters wide along each contour and placing the soil downslope to create a ridge. Create cross ties. These are ridges that are 15 centimeters high and about 1 to 2 meters long, every 3 meters along the contour. Ties must be lower than the main ridges so that water never flows over the main ridges. Now use a rake or spade to level out each basin, as this is the water catchment area. Plant in 2 rows, one on either side of the ridge and furrow. Place mulch in the furrows if possible. Fertility pits. Fertility pits enable runoff water to be captured and conserved in pits that are filled with organic matter such as compost or manure. The organic matter increases the fertility of the soil and minimizes the loss of water from evaporation. Plants, particularly those that require a lot of water, such as bananas, pawpaws, and tree tomatoes, are grown in and around the pits where they benefit from the moist and fertile soil. To make a fertility pit, you dig a circular pit about 1 meter deep in the shape of a bowl, and the soil is placed around the edge of the pit to form a ridge or mound. The pit itself is filled with organic matter like an ongoing compost heap, and trees and bushes are planted around the rim. A diversion furrow is constructed upslope of the pit to direct excess runoff into the pit. Storing water in containers. There are a number of ways of storing rainwater in different types of containers, ranging from a small bucket to tanks to small dams. We have become used to seeing the 5,000-litre green tanks attached to rooftops throughout South Africa, of which the Jojo tanks are the most common. Above-ground tanks. Above-ground tanks can be constructed out of a range of different materials, including plastic, blocks and plaster, corrugated iron, ferrocement, and natural stone. These tanks come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and it is also possible to use more than one tank if the roof catchment area is large enough. The plastic tanks are cheap, easy to install, and have fewer quality and leakage issues. One of the disadvantages of plastic tanks is that they have an expected lifespan of between 5 and 10 years, whereas well-constructed ferrocement or block and plaster tanks can last up to 30 years with ongoing minor repairs. Plastic tanks typically come in sizes between 1,000 and 10,000 litres, and they must always be positioned properly on level and stable bases. Underground tanks. It is often more effective to collect the surface runoff from the ground into the underground tanks, as we can collect water from a much bigger catchment area than just the area of the roof. Underground tanks come in many shapes and sizes and can be completely buried or only partially so. In Botjini and Putadichaba, an innovative approach was adopted whereby reinforced JoJo tanks were buried in the ground. This made storage of 15,000 litres per household affordable. There are a number of cheap and easy ways to get the water out of these tanks. The easiest is using a bucket on a rope. There are also simple siphon pumps available, as well as hand pumps and foot pumps known as treadle pumps. If you position the tanks above the garden or field where the water is to be used, then it is possible for the water to gravity feed out of these tanks. Roof water harvesting. Collecting water from roofs has a number of advantages over other surfaces. Roofs are physically in place and runoff is immediately accessible. Water collected from roofs is much cleaner than from ground runoff, and most of the rainwater falling on a roof can be collected as there is little absorption or infiltration on the roof surface, with thatch being an exception. There are three components of roof water harvesting: the storage tank, which we have discussed already, the roof, and the gutter. Most roofs are suitable for rainwater collection, including corrugated iron, slate, fiber cement, and tiles. However, roofs painted with metallic or lead paint should not be used because the metals are toxic and can poison the water. There are a number of different gutters that are widely used in South Africa. PVC gutters are well suited to houses which are constructed more formally, but they are difficult to attach to informal housing such as huts and shacks and cannot be used on thatch roofs. Sheet metal gutters are made from flat galvanized sheets or from corrugated sheets which have been flattened with a hammer. Homemade gutters can accommodate the challenges presented by informal or traditional housing and can be hung from roof sheets which are skew by attaching them with fencing wire. These gutters are more adaptable than the PVC gutters as they can be bent or twisted to ensure that sufficient slope is achieved in situations where roof lines do not slope consistently. However, sheet metal gutters cannot easily be used in rondavels or thatched roofs. Year-round HDPE guttering is a patented system that is specifically designed for collecting water from thatched roofs. It is a highly flexible system which is well suited to widely varying construction situations found in rural buildings. The gutters can be bent around corners and can easily accommodate changes in level. Grey water harvesting. Grey water harvesting is when you recycle wastewater from the household and use it to water the garden. The best grey water to use is bath or shower water, basin water, and the water used to wash clothes. This recycled water is purified when it passes through the soil, as this area is biologically active. Use grey water as soon as possible after collecting it, and carry it in buckets to where you will use it. Apply the grey water directly onto the soil. Try not to allow the grey water to come into direct contact with the edible parts of food crops. Adding mulch to areas where grey water is used helps to speed up the natural decomposition of waste materials. You can minimize the buildup of soap in the soil by rotating the use of grey water and fresh water, as the fresh water will flush out the contaminants from the soil. There are also a number of gardening techniques, such as tower gardens, and keyhole gardens, which are ideal for using grey water. These beds contain columns of small stones to filter out the soap. Additionally, ash is added to the soil to bind the soap. We trust this video will have given you some good ideas on how to make the most of the water that falls in and around your homestead, so that you will have more water available to meet your household needs, and especially so that you can grow your own food and become food secure.
Nansi mola